Hello everyone. This is Codjo. Today I'm going to talk with Spencer Ho about real estate in China. Waiting for him to join us. Hope you're having a fantastic day so far. Hey Spencer, thank you for joining. There you go. How are you, sir?
Yep, here
Yeah,
we are.
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for joining
I
me
am
today to
good.
talk
How are you?
about real estate in China. Well, I'm hearing you very
Looks
well.
like the signal is a little choppy.
I'm
Oh,
hearing
okay, there
very
it goes
well. How
again.
are you today,
Very good.
sir?
Uh,
Fantastic, fantastic. I
I'm
thought I'd
good.
have
How
you
are you?
today just to learn a little bit about real estate in China. Right, right. So I understand you are in
Okay,
California, right?
perfect. Yep, I'm in sunny California
Okay,
right now.
okay,
Very,
okay.
very, very hot weather
Well, I
actually
would
these
like for
couple days.
you to who you are, what you do, and why we're here.
Okay. So everyone that is online right now that does not know me, I'm Spencer Hu. As Kojo said, I'm based in California, Southern California, Los Angeles, and Orange County area. I am with the Orange County Realtors Association, where I have been their Global Business Alliance Committee Chair last year and this year. We are a pretty young committee, so we've been working on that. And we actually did our very first trade mission to China earlier this year, which I was the trade mission chair for. And we co-hosted that with Greater Las Vegas Association of Realtors, Arcadia Association of Realtors, and Inland Gateway, which is over here in California as well. So we had 24 brokers from across the United States go over to Shanghai and Beijing. One is to basically learn about how real estate is done over there and share about how we do real estate here in the US to our counterparts, as well as meeting with the associations and some of the ancillary services, so like immigration companies or wealth management companies and lending and banks over there in China. So that was very fruitful. I think it went pretty well. We actually had a lot of interest that wanted to join basically the week right before, so they couldn't make plans to go with us. So we're going to probably plan to do the China trade mission again in 2020. So everyone that is interested, just keep posted to myself or Kojo or the CIPS group. We'll have info for that. I am also going to be the 2020 chair for the global, what is it called? Global Real Estate Forum at the California Association of Realtors, so at the state level as well. So
Well,
I'm
I'm
trying to
so
keep
grateful
myself
that
pretty
you
busy here.
make a little time to join me today to talk about real estate in China and also United States. How do
Uh-huh.
we help consumer navigate their way to acquire real estate in China from anywhere, and also some Chinese citizen or Chinese resident who would like to acquire real estate in United States where you and I will practice. Right. So
Uh-huh, exactly. Okay, I'm glad you asked. Of course, we all are here based in the U.S. We usually are working with the buyers that are coming over here. So it's a great idea that you are digging a little deeper to see how, as a non-Chinese resident or non-Chinese citizen within China.
right.
So within China, everything works very differently, and I'm sure other countries besides the U.S. it's the same. So in China, they kind of classify their cities into a tier system. So we have tier one, which is Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, and Shenzhen. And then you have tier two, which is basically all those cities that are surrounding tier one cities. And then the list kind of goes on tier three, tier four, tier five, and so on. So within kind of the tier one cities and tier two cities where the most demand is and where the market usually is very stable or still appreciating a lot, they actually have purchase restrictions. So as a foreigner, it's very, very difficult to purchase unless you have a legitimate reason to purchase. Your legitimate reason cannot be, I want to invest in China real estate. That's not legitimate to them. Your legitimate reason basically has to be you are either living there, or you work there part-time, or you basically were born there and you basically left in between for school or work, and then you're going back. You need to purchase something. So you need to have an actual residency status. And how this residency status is done in China is very different than how we have residency status everywhere else in the world. Everywhere else in the world, your residency status is either a passport or a green card, a permanent residency type card. In China, they have something very, very, what do you want to call it? Very specific down to the city level. So if you want to buy in Beijing or you want to buy in Shanghai, you need to actually have a local residency ID for Beijing or for Shanghai. So if you live in Beijing, you cannot purchase in Shanghai. And if you live in Shanghai, you cannot purchase in Beijing. So it makes it very difficult. And they mainly enforce these rules because I want to say maybe 5 years ago or so, a lot of the Chinese residents that did have the wealth, so upper middle income and the affluent, they basically went crazy purchasing real estate. And that made it so that there was a housing shortage for the average Joe. They could not get in, basically the lines became very long and they had no opportunity to purchase properties. So this kind of policy went into effect. And then some other things kind of happened as a byproduct. A lot of people basically got fake divorces, basically. So husband and wife got divorced on paper, and that allowed them to separately buy 2 properties each. So they can now buy 4 properties instead of just the 2 properties that they were limited to, which is 1 for the principal residence that they're living in and 1 for investment property, which is the current limit, basically, for any of these restricted cities. And right now, mainly for these properties in China, it works on a 70-year land lease. The government owns all the land. The developers basically acquire the land through the government or through a private entity that had it previously. But the actual land itself has that 70-year land lease in place. So depending when that lease started, there could be very little time left on the property. And here in the US, we understand if your property is on leased land, the closer you get to that lease, basically the end of the lease, the less the property is worth. And that's kind of the same that happens in China. If you're buying a property that has less than that 70 years, meaning you're not buying brand new, of course. If you're buying something that's been already built for 20 years or 30 years, you only have a limited time left on that title, and of course that will affect the value and the desirability. So the most of the buyers in China, they would be looking for brand new properties. This is one of the reasons, brand new properties. So all of us that are watching right now, if you've worked with Chinese buyers, I'm sure you've seen the same trend or habit, them looking at brand new projects only. And this is one of the reasons. The second reason that they look at brand new properties only is that the property purchase for real estate is very tied in with culture and tradition. And I've mentioned that when I was posting that we're doing this Facebook Live. And what I mean by that is in China, as a younger couple, when you're getting married, usually by tradition, the husband basically buys a brand new property. So that's kind of to show that they're ready to start their own family. So if they're not buying a brand new house, their friends circle, their social circle, they might lose social credit because of it, unless there's a specific reason that they're not purchasing a brand new home and they're purchasing something like a trophy property, for instance. That's different. But for the kind of more middle income, upper middle income, they're going to be purchasing a brand new home to kind of show the wife's family and the wife that they have the ability to basically start that new life together, start a family, and be comfortable. And at the same time, basically, those that are not in that category that can afford a brand new home, they're going to have difficulties. So one, they might not be able to purchase in that central portion of the city where the value is more. And in Asia and Europe, they're based on what's called a CBD model, Central Business District. The closer you get to the CBD, which is downtown, the more the value is for the property, which here in the US, I think that only applies for Manhattan and probably San Francisco, where if you're in the CBD, the properties are worth more. Where I am, that would be downtown LA, which yes, there are some nice projects, but downtown LA is not where you want to live unless you have a specific reason. So in Asia and China, CBD is where the value is the highest, maybe double whatever the average for the entire city is for property value. So what will happen is a lot of these couples might have to buy outside of the central area, which in China specifically, if you're purchasing outside of the specific central Beijing or central Shanghai, whatever that might be, an hour outside, that's looked upon very, not very good, basically. A lot of people are saying, why are you doing that? There are some areas you do that and it's okay, because if you're buying a very expensive villa, estate home, that's the only area you can find an estate home. You're not going to find an estate home in downtown Beijing or in downtown Shanghai. There's no land. So if you're buying an estate home, you're going to be outside of central area, and there's a reason, and that's okay. But at that point, you have private drivers, you have a support staff that's helping you basically navigate that kind of the inconvenience of being a little bit farther. The other byproduct is a lot of these younger couples, if they need to be in that central city, they're looking at secondhand homes. So there is a secondary resale market in China. That's a lot more difficult to navigate, of course. Basically, for China, based on what I just explained, probably 70% plus of the real estate market is brand new homes. The leftover 20 to 30% is secondhand. So it's a very limited market.
If I'm in the residency condition, what are the challenges that I face for the financial issue? How do I get funds to get my real estate?
So if you can qualify to purchase as a resident, which means you basically have that local residency card, or you found a way to get a temporary local residency card, which is basically done by basically where you're working, employment-based and local taxes-based. Usually a 2 or 3 year period, you pay that, and then you can get the temporary, and then that can convert to a permanent at one point. So if you're purchasing a home in China, it's very similar to here in the US as far as the actual process for financing. There are banks that you can basically apply to get a loan for the property. And of course, if your family does or has the ability, you can do an all cash purchase. And with the all cash purchase with a new home builder, they actually give you a discount. So you'll have maybe a 3%, 4%, 5% discount because you are purchasing all cash. So a lot of people, they'll borrow that money and then figure out on the back end how to basically do a refinance after in order to get that better price, which is a strategy. For resale properties, there is a very, very, very big difference than here in the US. Basically, if you are a seller and you're selling your home in order to purchase another home, you basically need to figure out how to pay off your existing loan first before you can purchase your next home. It's not like here in the US, basically everything kind of happens concurrently with the new loan from the buyer is going to pay off your existing loan, and then the proceeds basically go to seller. In China, basically the existing loan needs to be paid off first, and this kind of created a kind of a second industry. So they're doing basically these lending institutions have specialized groups that kind of do what you call a bridge loan. So they're paying off the existing loan in order for that week or 2 weeks in between for that new loan to come in and basically pay the seller, and the seller can pay off the original loan. So there's extra steps in between, extra fees, extra process, extra headache, all of that.
So do they use like a closing attorney like we do here in the US?
So in China, they don't have the same services. So they don't have anything that is basically the full legal version of title. They do have property records, but they don't have title insurance, meaning the chain of title is protected per se. They don't have what we would call an escrow company. So a lot of things kind of happen between both of the brokerages that are in between that are helping. So depending if you're buying a brand new home, so of course that's going to be the developer on the developer side, and then it's going to be a new home specialist as far as the agent on your side. I should mention, basically as far as the agents go, you have new home brokerages, so all they represent is new home projects. So if a buyer goes in and says, I want to buy a home in this area, that company is only going to bring you to new home developments. And then you have basically the resale secondary market brokerages, which there are a large number as well, and they only deal with the resale properties. They can, if they want, represent a new home, but that's not their specialty. The new home brokerages, they will not at any circumstance represent a second-hand home because they don't understand that process at all. It's a very different process. So it's very different. In China, they do not have an MLS. So it's not like we are here in US or Canada, where there's a central home listings platform and you have buyer's agents and you have listing agents. In China, you only have listing agents, and everything is basically an open listing. So each listing, you could have 5, 10, 15, could be many agents representing the same property. So whoever that agent is and using whatever marketing methods or advertising methods, they basically are finding the buyers for that property. So that whoever finds the buyer in the end is who is getting paid. And that's probably 90% of the real estate industry is following that model still. And I know Europe, for being such a very historical and long history of being in existence, they use a very similar model. I've been to England, I've been to France, I've been to Germany, I've been to Spain. They use a very similar system. Everything is kind of open listing, so it's a very antiquated system. China, they are still very young. As far as the real estate industry, it's only kind of started maybe 15 to 20 years ago. So they are, of course, as any younger entity, trying to figure out how to do it correctly. So a lot of the larger real estate associations, as far as the industry goes, they're trying to evaluate how do they implement something like an MLS? How do they implement exclusive listings? And you have companies, I won't name the company since I don't want to be promoting any company, but everyone probably knows which company it is, but they basically are younger in China. They basically entered China probably about 5 years ago. The first master franchisor failed and the master corporate office took over the operations. But they basically are trying to bring in this exclusive agency type of arrangement, this type of model, this business plan
Spencer, do agents need to be licensed by the state or the city to practice real estate in any part of China?
Okay. So very good question. So in China, at the national level, they do have a real estate licensing program and a department that basically helps the actual people get the license. And on paper, this is supposed to be required. However, only probably about 10% of the agents actually have this license. So this is very scary. Here in the US, we have licenses. We're part of the NAR, so we basically follow a very set, defined code of ethics. In China, they don't have basically in practice, they don't have that licensing in place. On paper, they do, but in practice, they don't have the, it might be that they don't have the manpower. It might be that the government doesn't support creating more policy or manpower to support policing this. So they don't have that in place, unfortunately. They do have national level real estate associations. So those of the agents that do look at the real estate agent position as an actual career and not just kind of a gig to make money, they'll be members of these associations and they're ongoing trying to learn how to work correctly. Some of these
Okay.
associations, like I mentioned earlier, they're the ones that are trying to create that MLS system, trying to create the better models. So they are trying, but of course, with China, they are one of, if not the highest population in the world, one of, with
Right.
1.3 billion people living there. So it is a much larger country. With the agents, they don't have a very definite count because you don't have the mandatory licensing. So you don't know how many total agents you have everywhere.
Right.
They estimate they should have maybe around 1 million agents. So here in the US, we have probably what, 1.3 million. So they have probably a same amount of agents, but they have a lot more people than we
Right.
have here
Right.
in the US, of course. So they're servicing a lot more people. Um, but with that, basically,
Right. Okay.
you have so many agents that are running around
It
without
is. It's a
licenses.
little bit
So a
scary.
lot of
I
bad
know
things
you
can
are a
happen.
certified
Yeah.
international property specialist. Right. And as such, you also traveled
Yes.
extensively. One of the questions that I want to ask you, Spencer, is if now you're traveling and you may be anywhere in Spain or China or Hong Kong, and you find somebody who said, I want to buy a house in the United States, what would be the first step?
hmm So, as far as international buyers buying in the US is always usually going to be somewhere on their top of a preference because of it being well known as my.
It look like I'm losing you here, Spencer. Okay. Yeah, yeah. See, I lost you for a few
Well
minutes.
known.
So you just came
Hello?
back. Can you
Okay.
repeat what you just said about
Oh,
United States be on top of the list of buyers?
okay. So yeah, usually the US is going to be higher preference for a lot of buyers because of its long history of having a very stable economy. And with that stable economy, the real estate market goes along with that. Of course, we all understand in the 2007, 2008, there was a kind of a mortgage crisis that caused a real estate crisis, and that was across the entire world. So that wasn't just the US. So usually, if there's no big events like that, the US is not going to be very affected. So with the buyers that are purchasing from outside of US coming to the US, we always want to understand their reasons why they're purchasing. That's, I think, the most important. For instance, we work almost primarily with Asia. So a lot of the Asians buy here in US because they want their children to attend schools, either the public
Right.
schools or the
Okay.
colleges or whatever. So that's very important to them. So we need to understand for where my office is based, we're based in Irvine, which is basically for the public school system. It's number one for the school district for California. For their individual high schools, it's
Right.
basically within the top 10 for some of them for California. So that's one of the big drivers. For other people, they want to move over. It's for other reasons. It might just be for lifestyle. So it might be a vacation home. So something next to the beach, something next to an amusement park, something next to a famous landmark or something like that. We see a lot of foreign buyers in Florida. Florida is the number one foreign buyer location. If you consider all the foreign purchasers coming here to the US, and this has been probably the last 5+ years, and there's a reason for that. One is basically the price point is very good. Entry price point, you can get a home for probably 200,000 and going up. Orlando, Tampa, that area. Orlando, you have Disney World. So a lot of people are purchasing for vacation homes. A lot of these vacation homes, they basically are in what you call short-term rental type communities. So they're managed. So if you're not using
Okay.
it, some other company is going to manage the project for you. It could be furnished when you purchase it. So it's
Okay.
kind of a 100% managed asset, and you have the rental returns from that. So anywhere from maybe 6% to 10%, maybe higher. Florida is also good with basically all the countries that are not Asia. So all the countries, for instance, Europe, South America, Central America, Mexico, and then Canada. We see a lot of buyers buying in Florida. So part of that for Canada specifically is the weather is very important. So Canada, of course, we know is in the north. It's colder. Their number one purchase spot is Florida, and that's one is the price, two is the weather is a lot warmer. So when it's too cold in Canada, they can go over to their vacation or second home in Florida, enjoy for 2, 3, 4 months, half the year, and then when it's better, go back to Canada. So that we see a lot as well.
Okay. Well,
as far as
those are
international
very
purchase
important
patterns.
information. One thing that I would like you to tell us a little bit about is the EB5 program that you certainly know about it and also have been studying that
Okay.
visa program. Tell me a little bit about what's going on with it today and what are the changes that's coming pretty soon.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, yeah, no problem. So the EB5 program is an immigration investment, so investment-based immigration. EB basically stands for employment-based. So at the USIS, which is the U.S. Immigration Service, they have, there's multiple categories. So there's EB1, EB2, all the way up to EB5. EB5 basically was created in the early 90s, and what the main goal was to have investors invest into either their own self-directed project or a regional center project, meaning a project that's managed by a regional center, which is immigration department approved. And for the regional center projects, this amount was 500,000, with the self-directed projects being 1 million. So it was 500,000 or 1 million was the choice. And the projects basically for 500,000, a reduced amount needed to be in what's called a target employment zone, where the employment numbers were lower by a certain percent from the national average, where the US government basically wanted to create more jobs. So what the regional center project and what the self-directed project, what they need is each applicant, they need to basically create 10 jobs as a result of them either coming over and running their own project, or 10 jobs per family if they're joining a regional center project. And by regional center project, these could be new hotels, they could be big shopping malls, they could be a hospital, they're expanding a whole entire new wing, so a large expansion. It could be a renovation for any of these above projects. And usually these are going to be projects that are 10 million, 50 million, 100 million. So they're all these larger projects. So you could have multiple families from EB5 investors coming in. And by EB5 investor family, it would be a husband, wife, and any child under the age of 21 when it's approved. So this is where it was important. And what happened was China basically went very crazy on this because it was very easy for the Chinese to market this immigration product to the general public there in China. You could basically invest 500,000. At one point, you most likely will get the money back, and you'll have a green card as a result. So the children can basically stay in the U.S., the family can stay in the U.S., the children can attend the public schools here in the U.S. So what happened is the EB5 program has 10,000 slots per year. So 10,000 families can apply. And in between, the Immigration Service changed it, so 7,500 of the slots went to the Chinese or originated families. And I believe for that, Hong Kong is part of that because Hong Kong is part of China right now. Taiwan is not part of that. So what happened is these last several years, because it is so popular for these EB5 projects, there started to form a big line for the China-based EB5 applicants. And by the big line, basically, if you wanted to start a new EB5 case today from China, your family's from China, it's going to take 10 to 15 years from start to finish before you get your permanent green card, which is a 10-year green card renewable. So many families, in my opinion, are not going to take their 500,000, put it somewhere for 10 to 15 years in the hope that the project is going to succeed and they get their money back. So right now for China, EB5 is not really going to be the number one choice anymore. The leftover 2,500 spaces, each country has an allotment of 750 spaces per year. And some countries are actually getting near that cap as well. Vietnam is being one of them. So Vietnam, EB5 is still very popular. Depending how the Immigration Service handles it, there might be a line type system for Vietnam as well. So what Codjo was mentioning was last month we actually had EB5 reform finally happen. And EB5 reform has kind of been a controversial topic for the last several years. The program, like I mentioned, came out in the early 90s. The price of entry, the 500,000 and 1 million, that has never changed since the early 90s. So what is that, 20, almost 30 years? And they have always said those need to be changed based on inflation, based on cost of living, all that. And of course, if you change it higher, you might get a higher quality of applicant, not just anyone that can kind of ask around and borrow that 500,000 amount and get here to the US. So you have kind of a higher threshold, a higher quality applicant, maybe a more educated or more financially well-off client applying for this. So two things happened with the EB5 reform that was approved last month. One is the price. Finally, they figured out what amount to increase it to. So for the regional center projects, it's going from 500,000 up to 900,000, so almost double. And then for the self-directed projects, meaning you're going to either buy an existing business or buy a commercial building and run your own new business out of it, that's going up from 1 million to 1.8 million, so also almost double. And every 5 years, this can be readjusted, so reassessed. So in 5 years, they're going to see what the economy is doing here in the US. And depending if they need to raise it based on inflation or cost of living, or just the program needs to have more restrictions, that's the time that they're allowed to change it. Up, down, keep the same. The second policy that changed is the current EB5 system, which is going to be expiring on November 21st. So right now we do see a lot of people looking for EB5 projects because they want to get in and their application started and basically stamped by the US immigration saying they received the application before that cutoff date to get that 500,000 amount. The current projects, they're basically based on US Census tract maps. So what that means is for the target employment zones, they might not necessarily be in areas where actually the projects will benefit and create the jobs that the program was originally created for. And what I mean by that, and I'll use an area here in Los Angeles where most people can kind of relate. I'm not sure if it has this problem or not, but everyone knows Beverly Hills. Beverly Hills, of course, is very, very high-end, very affluent area. But what is surrounding Beverly Hills, if you go out maybe a couple blocks, might be lower income, higher density, low employment type areas. So these lower income, lower employment areas might overlap as far as the map with Beverly Hills. So it might have been possible for some of these regional center developers to create these projects in areas that these projects are not meant for. So the second part of the EB5 reform is they're basically creating their own maps to isolate the actual areas where the lower employment is. So the projects will actually benefit the original areas, cities, localities, and the actual citizens, residents of that area to create those jobs that are needed. So I think it's a very good thing that it finally came around. They finally made a decision. They put their hand down, said this is what it's going to be, and they're going to make it happen.
Spencer,
so
I really enjoyed visiting with you today. You gave us so many great information. Again, you are in California. You're a licensed real estate agent and certified international property specialist. My name is Codjo Cossou. I am your host right here in North Carolina. If somebody have a question about the Asian market or the real estate industry, the global real estate, buying, selling, and investing, you can always contact either one of us. You can comment on this video or share it with your friends. And again, Spencer, it was an honor. I know you travel a lot, and I'm glad I can catch you while you're in town this week.
Mm-hmm. Oh, no, the honor is all mine. I'm very happy to speak and share about my experiences. I'm sure pretty much like yourself, we're here to basically try to educate the rest of our peers, either in the CIPS community or across the US, how to basically work with the international clientele, whether they're the clientele coming into the U.S. in your local areas, or if you're representing clientele that want to purchase outside the U.S.
Awesome.
It is a very
thanks a
untapped
lot,
market.
and
It's an opportunity.
we'll stay connected. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye-bye, sir.